So I'm talking about minimizing candidate dropouts because this is a conversation that came up in one of the coaching communities that I have, and I thought I'd put this together just out in the open for everyone to benefit from. And this is purely a case of how we internally track the candidate dropouts through our recruitment process to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And that's how we minimize any kind of problems coming out throughout the candidate journey. So just for context, if you're working independently, you're a recruiter working for an employer, or if you're a business owner, then this is a pretty good exercise. This is exactly how we do it, and we just make sure that we're constantly refining it along the way. And just in case you're wondering where it applies, if you don't recognize this diagram, I'll leave a link below. But ultimately, what we're talking about is this part of the process on the right-hand side, the candidate journey, not the conversion here from cold to engaged, but somebody who is engaged, passive, or active, and they're considering a new opportunity. How do you get them from active all the way down to placement? And what are the challenges and problems that come up along the way? And then this is how you're going to make sure that you minimize some of the problems. So, looking at this, most of the candidate journey begins here at the qualification stage. Some of you might collect, I mean, if you're using job boards, you might be collecting CVs first and then going over to qualification stage. Not a way that I endorse or recommend, but either way, qualification is usually the first stage. You definitely don't want to be sending CVs before you've qualified them, but when you're qualifying them, this is where you're gathering all the information about the candidate, where you're trying to figure out, is this person actively looking? Are they desperately looking? Have they been made redundant? Is there something in particular that they're looking for? Are they just looking because they're looking for a pay rise? What are all their motives? What are the things that interest them? And that's what happens at the qualification stage. And if you're trying to qualify them, then the problem that you might have is maybe they don't pick up the phone. This is purely a case of arranging a convenient time to have a conversation. So I'm going to go down each individual step along the way, the problems that you have, and then how you can reevaluate and change this process around to make sure that you don't face the challenges and problems along the way. So collecting CV stage, sending CV stage, and all the way down to the start date for the candidate. When you're trying to collect a CV, sometimes you might come across a problem that they don't have the CV ready, or they need like 2 weeks to get their CV together. I've had that a few times. Hopefully it's relatable to you. Or you go to send the CV and then they say, you know what, I didn't actually agree for you to send my CV to that particular company. And then let's just go a little bit further. Now, so you send the CV out to the client, the ones that you've agreed to with the candidate, and all of a sudden the client's got all these questions, wondering like, you know, what about this? Can you clarify this? What about this on their CV? What about this experience? What about this gap? All of these things come into it. And then you go to arrange interviews, and now all of a sudden it becomes a challenge to match their availability. Like, I hope nobody has all of these problems in one go, but along the candidate journey, depending on how many times you go through this process, and this is from the point of qualification right the way up until their start date. When you consider this entire process, like I hope you don't have all of these challenges, but if you don't have a well-defined qualification process, then ultimately you will. So you're going to find out what their availability is. Then you're going to struggle to get hold of the candidate when it comes to getting feedback. Then it comes to negotiating the offer, and the candidate just isn't happy with the package or the salary that's on offer. And then it comes to accepting their offer, and you know they want to take a week to have a conversation with their spouse. And then it comes to agreeing start dates, and maybe there's a planned holiday, and now all of a sudden they want to start after the holiday, and this delays the start date and ultimately delaying when you can collect either the first or the final bit of the fee, depending on how you work. And then it comes to resignation, and now you end up with a counter offer. You're trying to organize the final day, and then you're also maybe even trying to help them with how to actually approach the resignation, because maybe they've worked with their same employer for over a decade, and it is quite a daunting experience. And then you've got your notice period, you're trying to negotiate that. And then same again, when it comes to start date, you want to start after the holiday. Like they've resigned, everything is done, final day is done, and now they've got this planned holiday and they want to start after the holiday, and it just delays everything altogether. So when you consider all of these challenges, you can reframe every single one of these challenges into a question that you can ask up here. So do you have any holidays planned? And you can preempt the candidate and say, if the client is looking to make a decision on this particular hire really quickly, do you have anything in place where it might cause some delays on when you can start, provided that you're really happy, they're really happy, and you're happy to start? And you do it in reverse order. And then you come backwards, and then you just say, okay, what about your notice period? What is your notice period? Are you aware that you can negotiate your notice period, even though it might say it in black and white in your contract? And you go backwards again. And then you ask the question again, like, what happens if your employer gives you a counteroffer? Like you said that you're looking to leave for X, Y, and Z reason. Like always try and get 2 or 3 reasons and not purely just a case of money. Here's a point that we've practiced over the years is that if a candidate is looking to leave and their only motive is to do with money, then we actually help them get a pay rise with their current employer. And if they follow through, then brilliant, they're happy where they are. But asking the question, like, would you just accept a pay rise from your current employer if you resigned and then they offered you a slightly higher pay grade? Would that put everything to rest? And if the answer is yes, then yeah, their biggest motive is money. Let's like try and get a little bit more out of them. And when it comes to planned holidays, again, preempt it. Like, do you have any planned holidays? Just literally ask the question, or any significant dates that are coming up that could have an impact on when you can start with your new employer. And even when it comes to accepting the offer, like, do you have anyone who you're really close to, family member or friend who you really like to have this conversation with? And, even if they do say, yes, I like to speak to my spouse, then that's fine. Like most people do like to have that conversation, but ask who is the ultimate decision maker. And at the end of the day, what would happen if you were really happy with the opportunity, but your spouse wasn't? Like, how would you manage that between each other based on your experience of your relationship? And maybe even ask like, how long have you been together? Because if they've been together 9, 10 years plus, then they probably already know what the outcome is going to be and how the conversation is going to go. So you can preempt that, not to say that this is going to be a justification to delay it, but for you to coach them and advise them and say that, look, if this is going to be somebody who is very involved in the decision-making process, then have them involved right now. Like tell them that you're looking for a job and tell them all the companies that you're considering. So when it comes to decision-making day, you're in a position to actually make a decision on the day because they've been with you along the entire journey. And here's something that I've seen it happen maybe once or twice where it's almost pushed to the side to say, look, it's not their decision. This is your decision only. Like keep your spouse out of it. Like it's the wrong way to go about it because this is for many people, changing jobs is a really difficult decision and they want to have their closest, nearest and dearest family members involved in the decision-making process. It's just that as recruiters, we don't see it as a really big deal because we speak to so many people who are changing jobs and it's really difficult for us to differentiate what is the challenge when it comes to changing jobs. And now continuing with it, going backwards, what about their interview availability? Like what's the typical time that they're free? Like do they have work from home day where they can take a call during their lunch break, or if they finish at a certain time, like can they take calls at that time? And this one in particular is more to do with the client side of it, meaning how well have you understood the expectations of the client for what they're going to be looking for? Because if you can understand that, then you can preempt all of those questions at the qualification stage. And now when you qualify the candidate, you ask them all of these questions and you put it in your write-up, in your email, as part of you presenting the CV. Now, looking at all of these problems and challenges and the way that we've solved it anyway, is if we take every single problem, rephrase it into a question, and then ask it at qualification stage, right at the beginning, literally right at the beginning. So we could qualify a candidate, collect their CV, send a CV, and arrange an interview without having to go back and forth and reconfirm everything because we already have all the questions that the client's going to ask. We already have the times that they're available and booking that interview and meeting within 24 to 48 hours because we qualified all of the problems and challenges before it's even got to a stage where it becomes a problem or a challenge. So by you reviewing, well, we do this and you can do this and literally just copy me. If you look at your entire candidate journey all the way through to the end and start date, and I'm not talking about client and candidate care at this point, this is like literally up until the start date. You'd be surprised at how many people I've spoken to and they just don't even know what a client and candidate care process is. But anyway, the point here is qualification all the way through to start date. Map out the entire journey. Look at all the challenges and problems that you would encounter for your niche and your market specifically, because there's going to be some really specific challenges that come up in our niches to do with qualifications and the skills and expertise in very particular industries, markets, and sector specialisms. Whereas in your niche and your market, it's going to be something very slightly different. But look at all of the candidates that you've taken through this entire journey and look at every time that you've had a problem point and rephrase that into a question and now add that into a qualification state. So now we have a standardized process for qualifying candidates. And what happens is every time we get a candidate, the chances of them dropping out throughout this entire journey is super slim because the problems that we could have encountered if we didn't qualify them properly, they only come up when you don't qualify them properly. So given 10 plus years experience, more so from my business partner and others in our team, like combined experience, we can review our entire candidate journey and map and the process every few months and turn around and say, you know what, there's this new question that keeps coming up time to time. Let's stick that in the candidate qualification process. So you stick it right the way up here. And then what happens is every time you qualify a candidate, you preempt every single problem and challenge that could come up right the way up until the start date. And now all of a sudden you don't have those problems because you asked all of those questions up front. So this is how we do it. We literally map out the journey, map out the process, all the step-by-step stages that the candidate would go through, write down all the problems that they would go through, rephrase them as questions, and put them right at the beginning in the candidate qualification stage. And all that means is that in your CRM or in your note-taking document or whatever you use, you have a template set of questions that you want to hit every single time that you go through. Now, it's really important that you don't make this sound like a robot and you just like almost like if you've ever applied for any kind of contract online, they go through like, what's your name? What's your last name? What's your date of birth? Like you don't do stuff like that. Go with the flow of the conversation because it has to be a relationship-based conversation, but ask them some of these questions. And as you start right at the bottom down here, then it really helps out. The way that I always did it, and this is just something that I practiced for the last few years in recruitment, is whenever I got onto a call with a candidate, I would just ask the question, hey, Mr. Candidate, I'm a recruitment consultant and I specialize in recruiting for the positions that you might be interested in moving into, just so that we're on the same page. Why are you even talking to me? And you let them explain to you why they're considering a new opportunity. And if everything revolves around the conversation about my salary, or maybe they've just had a fallout with their boss and it's a really sudden decision, if it's just those things, then you can already preempt this situation playing out, which is a counteroffer. So ignoring the counteroffer situation, ask them what else is more important to them. So this is the typical candidate journey from the moment that they say to you, I'm considering a job, or I want to have a conversation with you, right the way through to the end of their start date. And if you follow this entire journey, you can use automation to support you in some of this process as well. But ultimately, the more information you qualify right at the beginning, the fewer problems you have throughout the entire process. So do this exercise for yourself, for your team, for your colleagues. And the more times you go over this and you envisage and write down all of the problems that you're going to come across, the more refined you're going to be in the candidate journey. And that's only going to allow you to improve the number of people that you get all the way through to placed stage. So hope that's been valuable. See you next time.